Hello and welcome to yet another video of understanding procurement and supply. Today in our video we are going to be looking at the procurement life cycle or the procurement process. So the procurement life cycle is basically the transition of events that make up the process of procuring goods and services. There are 13 stages of the procurement process or cycle that we are going to be looking at, starting from the point where an organization defines the need up to the last stage, that is the asset management. So the first stage that we are going to be looking at under the procurement life cycle is understand the need and develop a high level specification. So here's the stage where stakeholders within the organization define a need that should be filled, whether it's a product or service that needs to be acquired or rendered to support the organization's internal operation. So the aim in this stage is to identify the need, frame it, and define it in terms of what it should do within the organization. Defining the need also involves developing a specification to determine exactly what the suppliers in question should offer in terms of actual usage. So a specification is basically a clear description of the requirements. It can be conformance or performance specification. Conformance specification gives clear instructions to the supplier about what is required and how it should be achieved. Basically, it gives the standards that must be met, for instance, recipes and technical drawings. Performance specification specifies what the product or service must do or achieve. It covers the functions a product must perform. So a specification should be developed together with stakeholders and colleagues to ensure that the final design is fit for purpose and it meets the general need. And also when considering the type of specification to use, there are factors that you need to consider. For instance, when you look at the conformance specification, the supplier is basically manufacturing the product based on the requirement or description that has been given by the buying organization. So it limits the supplier's creativity. The supplier doesn't have a room to be creative enough in order to bring something that is different to the buying organization. They has to meet the standards as specified by the buying organization. But when you look at the performance specification, it doesn't limit the supplier. In fact, the buyer is not even aware of what to expect from the supplier. In that way, it allows creativity. So when choosing the type of specification to use in this stage, you also need to consider um, the types of specification, also their benefits. So once you have a clear picture of what supplies you're looking to acquire look like, or rather, once the specification is developed, the next step is to conduct appropriate market research. So this involves analyzing the options available from different vendors and determining what will cost to either produce the need in-house, that is to manufacture it yourself as an organization, or to basically acquire from a third party or an external supplier. So the options to consider include the budget available to spend on the procurement, number of suppliers available, or whether to make or buy the product or service. So it is important to understand the budget before sending out any information to suppliers. This is very important to ensure you stay within the budget. But note that the budget that is available will affect the quality of product or service obtained. So once the budget has been finalized, the procurement professional should research the market to learn how commodity prices are behaving and how many suppliers are available. Because once you have an understanding of market prices, for instance, market prices for raw materials, if they are favorable, you are in a better position to know if it is indeed the right time to procure to make in-house or to outsource to an external supplier. So professionals should research the level of competition to understand market pricing. And they can use the Potter's five forces to understand the level of competition. Because with the Potter's five forces, they'll be able to understand the bargaining power of buyers, the bargaining power of suppliers, the rivalries that exist in between competitors, um, the threats of any substitute, threats of new entrants. So basically, with making this decision of making or buying, you have to consider a lot of factors, because you may find that with making, you have control over the processes, for example, the manufacturing processes. However, it may come at a cost. And then with buying, on the other hand, obviously the external suppliers or a third party, they are expert in what they do. So they are in a better position to deliver something that is of high quality. You are assured of quality. However, it also comes with losing control over your processes. So it's really important to consider these factors um, when analyzing the state. One other factor that we can look at under this is the cutters outsource metric, because a procurement professional can use it when deciding whether to make or buy. So the cutters outsource metric, it measures the strategic importance of the function's activity or product against its contribution towards operational performance. For instance, the products which has a low strategic importance to the organization and low contribution to operations performance, we can actually eliminate them. But when it comes to those with high strategic importance to the operation performance and also high operational performance, we should retain them in-house. They should not be outsourced as they are core to the organization. And then we are going to be looking at the next stage of the procurement cycle. So once you have decided whether to make or buy, the next stage is develop strategy or plan. So once the decision to make or buy has been made and the market has been evaluated, the next stage is to develop the strategy or plan of how to achieve the procurement. That is, define how you intend to leverage the option you choose at the market analysis stage. That is, if you outsource, is it going to be international sourcing or local sourcing? So the procurement professional should think about the external environment when developing this plan and consider factors that may affect their decision. So if it's international sourcing, like we said, there are economic factors like exchange rate, political factors like civil unrest, which may affect your acquisition as a whole. For example, they can use um, the stipple analysis to analyze which factors could affect their need and help them to develop their plan accordingly. So in our last video, we looked at the stipple analysis. You can actually go back to our video to have a more understanding of the stipple analysis. And the next stage in our procurement cycle would be the pre-procurement market test and market engagement. So market testing informs you on how your procurement strategy needs to change to adapt to prevalent market forces. Market testing is simply testing out market sentiment to determine what needs to change in your procurement strategy. For instance, if your desired supply is scarce over a certain season, your strategy might change to stockpiling them ahead of the season. So at this stage, you take note of determinants such as prices, competitor actions, currency fluctuations, any new legislation or regulations, market dynamics to get a clear picture of what your supply circumstances look like. So after all this test, if the feedback suggests that the time to procure, it is time to procure, or it is the right time to procure, then the next stage of the cycle can be carried out. But if the feedback is negative, the team should revisit the need and specification before continuing the process. So negative feedback can include no desire in the market for the end product, new laws about to be passed that will force the specification to change, or probably the currency is weak. So after market tests and market engagements have been carried out, the next stage is to develop documentation. So this stage involves creating the documentation that will be sent out to the potential suppliers. The documentation may be a request for quotation or the invitation to tender. So the aim here is to develop detailed preferences to guide your procurement choices to ensure the supplies you're buying would serve the intended purpose. So the choice of documentation depends on the agency of need, the procurement professional's preferred method of working, and also regulations and legal obligations. So requests for quotations are generally used they're used for much less complex requirements, and tenders on the other hand, they are long term and they are used for complex contracts or services. Requests for quotations are less formal and less detailed compared to the invitation to tender. So it will depend on the type of need required in addition to the factors we just stated. The request for quotations can contain specifications, technical drawings, prototypes, quantities required by the buying organization, delivery requirements, length of contract, and also how the supplier's quotation will be evaluated. So when we say that the choice of documentation depends on a variety of factors, it may be that whatever that we are procuring it, um, we have procured it before, and that normally we call it a straight V-buy. But when we procure something that we have procured before with some slight changes in the specification, it's called a modified rebuy. A modified rebuy. But when we're talking about a new buy now, we are procuring something that is totally new, something that we have not procured before. So these are some of the things that you need to look at when deciding or when developing documentation, because you are going to have to choose between the request for quotation or the invitation to tender, looking at your requirements as the buying organization. So once the documentation has been prepared, the next stage now is supplier selection. Supplier selection involves evaluating suppliers against the predetermined criteria to assess their suitability with the buying organization. So here, depending on your industry, it might be impossible to have all possible suppliers bidding for your business. So the ideal tactic to utilize here is to create a list of desirable tactics and use that to shortlist the suppliers who qualify to participate in the tendering process. So suppliers may be evaluated according to the Carter's 10 phase as the ideal tactic, and it includes competency, capacity, consistency, control, cost, commitment, cash, claim, culture, and finally communication. So with competency, it means that the supplier has the skills to deliver the product. Capacity, Does the supplier have space, resources, and knowledge to deliver the contract? Consistency. It means what processes does the supplier have to ensure consistent quality or service delivery? Control basically means that does the supplier have control of its policies, its procedures, or its supply chain? And then we have cost. Cost um, we are looking at the financial stability. Or sorry, cost we are looking at the the cost offered in terms of consistency and expectation. Like is the cost offered consistent with expectations and competition? Commitment. Here we are asking ourselves if the supplier is going to be committed to the relationship and delivering the product. Cash. Here we are looking at the financial position of the supplier, their financial stability, and we can use the credit ratings to evaluate suppliers' stability. Clean. Are the suppliers working towards sustainability? Culture. Is the supplier culture compatible with the buying organization's culture? And lastly, communication. That is how quickly and effectively does the supplier respond. So basically, the Carter's tendencies would help us to evaluate um, the suppliers against the predetermined criteria in order to assess their suitability with the buying organization. Suppliers may also be audited to ensure they have the corporate social responsibility policy and an ethical code of conduct. So once the suppliers have been selected, the next stage is to issue now the invitation to tender or the request for quotation. At this stage, the documentation that was prepared in stage 5 is sent out to the pre-evaluated suppliers from stage 6. In the public sector, the documentation would sometimes be sent in one stage to a market of suppliers who have not been pre-selected, and that is called the open tendering. Here the tender is widely advertised to potential suppliers who might show interest. So open tendering is used when the buyer expects there to be relatively limited interest and fewer bids to evaluate, and the documentation may be sent out by post or electronically. So in this case, if the documentation is an invitation to tender, all the suppliers should be issued with the invitation to tender at the same time. And tender documents can contain information for suppliers such as company information, specification, contract requirements, including the terms and conditions, as well as the deadline for submission. And when it comes to the deadline for submission, if the supplier fails to meet the deadline after the stated date, its bid will not be considered. So after the invitation to tender documents or the request for quotation has been issued, the next stage would be the evaluation or the validation stage. Here, after the shortlisted suppliers have sent in their bid, the evaluation process begins. It involves making a thorough, transparent analysis of each supplier and their offerings to determine which bid offers the most benefit to the organization. So here the bids or quotation documents from the potential suppliers should be evaluated against the documents generated and sent by procurement. This is to ensure that potential suppliers are offered or are offering a suitable product or service. It is easier to evaluate the offers if a performance specification has been used, because a performance specification may allow a variety of interpretation. Like we said before, Here, the buying organization doesn't necessarily know what to expect from the supplier. So it is a good practice to work cross-functionally and involve other teams who have knowledge and expertise, for example, designers, because bringing people together with different perspectives can improve problem solving and lead to smarter, more sustainable decision making. It is important, however, to note that um, the lowest price may not be the best price. So it's important to consider everything about the supplier's offer. The total cost of acquisition, which may include the price, the quality, the lead time, supplier reputation, supplier's ethical conduct, corporate social responsibility policy like we mentioned, training requirements, logistics and handling costs, and all that, just to name a few from the costs that you can consider. So once the preferred vendor is selected, a contract spelling out the terms of the customer-vendor relationship is drafted. And once both parties have an agreement on contract performance, key performance indicators, supply dynamic, logistics, invoicing, and contract management terms, the contract is signed. Then work on the items agreed upon commences. So, with the contract award stage, the two parties negotiate contractual terms to reach a mutual agreement before signing the final agreement and starting the contract. Creating mutually acceptable terms at this stage would help to reduce any problems that may arise throughout the contract. So in this stage, once the contract has been finalized, the procurement professional informs the suppliers who were not successful and give them feedback if required. However, this is compulsory in the public sector. The next stage after the contract award is the warehouse logistics and receipt. So with the supplier contract binding, the vendor is responsible for delivering supplies at the customer's request, meeting the specifications agreed upon during the contract award stage. So the logistics and warehousing agreements that were made earlier on apply here to ensure smooth, efficient management of the supply delivery. And this may include um, product coding, the spacing, layout, and frequency of delivery agreed upon. So in this stage, if the contract awarded is for tangible need, then the stores or warehouse department needs to be involved to prepare for the arrival of goods. The warehouse workers need to allocate space for products, be advised when to expect deliveries, and understand the specifications so that they can carry out quality checks accurately. Because sometimes it's very difficult to carry out quality checks accurately when you don't know, when you don't understand um, exactly a description, or you don't have a description, or when you don't understand the requirement. So from time to time, as stipulated in the terms of the contract, both parties, that is the vendor and the organization, should conduct a periodic review to determine how efficiently the customer-vendor relationship has been operating, and also identify any lapses in the customer-vendor relationship and chart a way forward to support improved performance, if at all there are any lapses. So in order to effectively manage supplier performance and contractual obligations, the supplier performance against key performance indicators should be reviewed regularly. The key performance indicators would have been agreed during post-contract award negotiation. So the organization and supplier should work towards continuous improvement. It may involve improving quality, innovation, or reducing waste in the supply chain. The next stage would be the supplier relationship or contract management. So, supplier relationship management is the ongoing process required to manage your relationship with your vendors, analyzing its supplier to gauge the right level of input required to maintain the relationship to realize the strategic goals of the organization at the end of the day. So, supplier relationship management and contract management are required during the whole contract to ensure that the agreement continues to meet the contractual agreement agreed at stage 9. So the style of the relationship required would depend on the strategic position of the product required or service being rendered. Strategic product or services demand a more collaborative style of relationship because of the complexity and risk associated with them. So basically, the style of relationship required would depend on um, the strategic product or services demand. So the last stage of our procurement cycle is the asset management or end of life. So over time, your organization's need might change due to a variety of factors. From changing, it can be from changing your focus to new niches in your industry, expanding or adjusting your product life. As a result, um, it's important from time to time to evaluate your procurement needs to determine if there's been any change and how you can adapt your procurement to the changes you discovered anew. So asset management is basically the process of staying on top of your procurement needs to ensure that um, your, your procurement process can still support your business operations. So in this stage, if the need is still current and unchanged, the procurement cycle process commences again, but from a different stage, as the need now is known and understood. But if the need is not required after the contract end, the procurement professionals should manage the end of life by aiming to reduce stock levels and inform supplier that there will be no further requirement after the contract has ended. In any case, or if the product requires disposal, procurement should help to assess the most cost-effective option to get rid of the product. And finally, if the product or service is still required after the contract ends, but will be slightly changed, the procurement cycle would recommence, but at a different stage now. So it is very important to look and consider all these factors when procuring um, or when procuring goods and services in an organization. This was basically all about our video about the procurement life cycle. So if you like the video, please like and hit the subscribe button. Um, Also comment on the comment section about anything that you'd want to be changed or anything that can be added or anything that we can both um, teach each other concerning the procurement life cycle.